Hey everyone, and welcome to another video on my channel. Today we're going to talk again about one of the most common questions that I get. And that question is, how do I get a job in Europe, USA, Canada, or at FAANG, right? And the answer to these is actually all the same. My name is Louis. I used to work at Google before I became a teacher. If you're more curious about my background, you can check the trailer on my channel. But other than that, we're going to dive straight into the topic today. So I'm going to talk today about the most important factor for getting such a job. Whether it's to work at FAANG or whether it's to move out of your country and move to one of these Western countries with a strong currency. And that factor is a genuine passion for programming. Now, it sounds very cheesy, and you'll have to let me set this up logically because it is actually, in my opinion, the most important factor. So first off, I'll say that I'm fairly sure, I'm just throwing out a ballpark estimate from my time working at Google, that at least 90 to 95% of my coworkers never consciously dreamt of working at Google. Instead, they were people who were passionate about programming, who became good at something they were passionate about, and as a result of being good at something, they got a job at Google. And I myself fall under that category, is that I never thought concretely about working at Google, but programming was something that I was very passionate and curious about. Now, before we go further, let me clarify the audience. Because again, I was teaching in boot camps in Turkey and Russia. And a lot of these people, a lot of my students wanted to move to, let's say, so-called Western countries with a better currency, like the euro, the dollar, the Canadian dollar, and so on, right? But in general, this is targeted to anybody who's trying to reach their goal job, whether that's to work at FAANG, whether that's to get a better job abroad from the country that you're currently in, because the principles apply very generally. But even further, I'm going to set up, something for you to think about, which is that all jobs are a competition, right? And especially, let's say, concretely, for example, that you live in Turkey and you're trying to get a job in Canada. Well, you are, whether you like it or not, competing with all these other applicants who need visas, who need some type of sponsorship from the company in order to get a job abroad. And abroad here, I'm saying relative to the country that you live in. Well, if it's a competition, you always have to ask yourself, what makes me different from the 10,000, 30,000, 100,000 other people from Turkey and other countries that are applying to these openings in Canada? And so that is the premise of today's video, right? And what I'm arguing is that the difference between those people who manage to successfully move from their country, right, to get a job somewhere that they dream of, and those who don't, that difference is essentially the level of passion in programming. And we'll see how this is reflected. So the way I'll structure this is essentially that from here on, I'll talk about some qualities of people who are really passionate about programming, right? And I'll talk about what I've observed from students and other people I've met who have managed to move abroad, whether it's at Google, whether it's at some other company, to find a job that they like. And you can follow along and think to yourself, again, I'm not saying you should always compare yourself to other people, but think to yourself, do I have these qualities? Does my CV reflect this? When I'm competing with these people, applying for jobs in Canada, in the US, and FAANG, where do I stand, right? And the answer to that is ultimately up to you to decide. So, the first quality that I've seen from people who are passionate about programming, who have managed to succeed in finding the job that they want, or at least the next step of their career that they want, is that they say yes to new technologies and opportunities. So what I mean by this is, yes, I'm sure that we're all trying out new technologies all the time. But my question is, how different are they, right? Because what I've noticed actually, and I'm actually going to talk about what I see on the flip side, the opposite, is I see many people who say they get a job working in React or something, right? And it's their first job maybe, and they spend a lot of time to learn React. And after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, they're the expert and they feel good being the expert. But what I'm going to argue, in my personal opinion, is that if you are the expert on something, it usually means it's time to do something new or learn something completely new, right? People like the feeling of being an expert, and I see many students who just simply become comfortable in their job. because you get to enjoy the benefits of the hard work that you've done to gain the knowledge about something. But actually, in my book, if you are the smartest person in the room about something, it means there's something wrong. Not because you're stupid, but because there's so much knowledge out there in the world. And you definitely don't know everything, right? And especially when it comes to programming, it means that you need to go do something new. So for example, when I worked at Google, one thing that I often did was I would proactively ask my manager to put me on a new team, on a new project about something that I had no idea about, right? Because to me, the point is, once you understand something and once you get good at something, it's time to go understand that next thing. And again, it's not just me. I'm saying that this is a quality that I've observed in many, many people around me, my coworkers, as well as students who have successfully managed to find a job abroad. That is, not to fear something new, but to proactively say yes and to seek out those opportunities. The second quality that's really, really important, I would say equally as important, is caring about code quality. Now, this is quite a complex topic, and I have a lot of thoughts about this. Because the truth is, from what I observed working in Turkey and Russia, and again, from listening to my students going to work at their first jobs, or to work even at big companies, there's not many people who care about code quality in a lot of these companies. And by the way, this is true even in the United States, right? If you don't know, at big companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so on, code review is quite strict, right? Like every piece of code that goes in gets reviewed, it gets feedback, and from that feedback, you improve yourself and build good habits for writing clean code. But the thing is, if you're not surrounded by people who also care about code quality, then actually it's going to be quite difficult to have that habit, right? To care about it or to even know what good code means. So what I'm saying here is that caring about code quality is, a very important trait. And it's something, again, that distinguishes you from the rest of the applicants. And it would show in the way that you talk about coding, in the questions you ask in the interview, in any samples of your code, whether or not you care about code quality. But I think what I mean to say is that because I know from talking to my students that more likely than not, if you're working in a company that they don't have strict code review, that you're probably not surrounded by people who care very highly about having the highest quality code. But my advice to you is, even when no one else around you is doing it, you need to try to care about it. And I've actually seen my own students, some of the ones who have really taken to heart the issues of code quality, be the one to proactively bring a culture of code review, a culture of caring about how clean the code is to their own companies, right? I hate to invoke this really overused quote by Gandhi, but it's like, be the change you wish to see in the world, right? Because the truth is, again, just speaking in terms of probability, it's very likely that people around you are not going to be the ones to start it. It has to be up to you, essentially. But again, to tie that back to the main point, which is, how does this relate to getting a job abroad? If you care about code quality, it's going to be something, logically following what I just said, that makes you different from all these other applicants around you, from all these other people around you, right? And so that's definitely one thing that I would think about. The next thing is to study your algorithms. It's again one thing where, we're looking at this from the perspective of what makes me different from the person next to me, right? And I've seen a lot of students try and fail to study algorithms. But if you manage to find the discipline, to study algorithms, even if you're not directly using those algorithms, it will make you a better programmer. And actually, I have a whole video about this. If I can figure out how to use the YouTube, I'll put the video, somewhere on the screen where you can click on it. But that being said, this is probably the third thing I would say. Again, it's not necessary, but it's again in the line of improving your programming skills in general, right? And so I highly recommend for those looking for a job abroad, and if you're looking for a job in FAANG, it's absolutely mandatory to know algorithms. To simply study algorithms, start reading some books, using these courses, fancy courses made by YouTubers these days, anything to try to gradually improve yourself in this respect. Now, the fourth thing, which is optional but also obviously good, is to simply code by doing pet projects and things like this. But I'm going to acknowledge the reality, which is that if you're already working a full-time job, if you already work 9 to 5, 10 to 6, 10 to 2, 1 to 3, I don't know, right? Doing a pet project is going to be quite difficult because you might be tired after work, right? So that's why I'm throwing it out there that working on your own side projects, trying to build an app yourself end to end, is one of the best experiences you can have to simply improve your coding abilities. But realistically, we have constraints, on our time or the amount of energy that we have in order to achieve something like that. So, that being said, I want to emphasize that if you are truly passionate about coding, if you are someone who's really curious about this world of coding, it will reflect in your CV. It will reflect in the way you talk about programming, and most importantly, it will reflect in your work, right? And what I'm arguing is that if your dream is to find a job in the US, find a job in Canada or Europe, when someone looks at your CV, when someone interviews you, and finally when someone works with you, they will be able to notice whether or not you have paid your dues. And so that's why it seems cheesy, but for me, the most important factor for finding that job is having this passion, and having this passion is what causes a person to have the discipline to improve themselves in some craft, right? Because people who are genuinely passionate, it doesn't feel like work when they do side projects. It doesn't feel like work, when they're reading about something new or trying to improve themselves. It's something that they like, and it's something that they want in their lives, right? So I'm not saying that you have to, work all day, overwork yourself, spend every single moment programming. But I am advocating that, if you don't have that passion or you do have that passion, to try to find that curiosity and try to constantly improve yourself, right? Because again, framing this from the sense of comparing you to the people next to you, it's like, if I look at your CV and I see that this person has worked on a bunch of side projects on their GitHub, they've tried to launch their own app, doesn't even matter if it succeeds, like they've tried, in the section under their past jobs, they talk about how they've done backend, how they've used multiple frameworks, how they've used like Vue, React. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what domain you're in. But the point is, I can see that they were curious from reading their CV. Now, compare this to someone else who, let's say they've worked for 3 years. And what I see is that they worked in React and they worked on a front end app. And what I think is 3 years and you never tried, to delve into something else, right? Like maybe you used a few other JavaScript frameworks, right? But again, look from the perspective of those working, and you can already see that it's very clear who the ones who are passionate, curious, and more knowledgeable about programming are versus those who are too comfortable and simply kept on doing the same thing for, years, right? So the thing is, if you are passionate, you will get good at programming. If you are good at programming, you will get noticed. That's essentially the chain of logic. And I think really that this is a common quality among all those who have managed to find jobs abroad that I know, right? And I'm not saying that this is the only way to get a job at FAANG, that this is the only way to get a job, in the country that you desire. But I am arguing that for the majority of people, this is probably the path that they took. As I mentioned, when I reflect on my own life, when I think about the lives of my own colleagues, they were people who were passionate about programming, right? And they liked it, and they thought critically about their mistakes. They tried to learn new things. And one day, it wasn't like their whole life they were vying to get into Google or FAANG or any of these companies, but one day they were accepted by these companies because they had developed, skills as a result of their passion. So, with that being said, I'll conclude this and just remind everyone that you should always be looking for new opportunities, right? In exploring new technologies, whether it's in a new company, or within the same company, switching teams, trying new projects. You should always care about code quality. You should practice your algorithms. And if you have time, you should definitely, do some type of side project. But again, limited based on your discipline, based on the amount of energy you have, if we're talking realistically about it. So, if you have any thoughts about today's video, I know that I have spoken very abstractly, but even if it's abstract, I think it's something that's very true. That's my opinion. Please leave a comment below with your thoughts, and if you do have a different thought about what the most important factor is for getting into FAANG, I would love to hear it, and feel free to leave it in a comment. Thanks everyone for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.